Hello, everybody. Welcome to the American Australian Association webinar for International Women's Day. We're a couple of days late, but it's always International Women's Day for me. So for those of you on this webinar who don't know me, I'm Jennifer Nason, and I'm Global Chairman of Investment Banking at JP Morgan, former chairman of the AAA, current board member, and I co-chair our business council with Lachlan Murdoch. So I would like to welcome all of you to this session, and I am thrilled to introduce Jaime Teevan to all of you, and we're just delighted to have Jaime with us for this conversation. So Jaime is what I call one of my pandemic friends, but we'll get to that in a moment. So Jaime is Chief Scientist and Technical Fellow at Microsoft in Redmond, in Washington State. Jaime's responsible in her various roles for driving really research-based innovation for Microsoft in their core products, which all of us are familiar with. So Jaime's really an advocate and works very much around how people use their time better in the workplace, productivity, the future of work, and so on. And that topic has obviously just been front and center through the pandemic. Prior to her current role, Jaime was technical advisor to CEO Satya Nadella himself. Jaime has so many awards, many of which I can't even pronounce because they're very highfalutin technical awards. And Jaime has a PhD from MIT and a BS from Yale, and is an affiliate professor at the University of Washington. So Jaime, thank you very, very much for joining us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Jennifer.
So before we dig into the conversation around technology, women in technology, your career path, and we've had many questions from people joining this webinar sort of ahead of time, sort of probing around those issues. But before we get to all of that, I just wanted to start with a question about Ukraine and the current geopolitical sort of situation, and wanted to see if you could tell us a little bit about how Microsoft is sort of responding to all of that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And we're obviously closely following the tragic and unlawful invasion of Ukraine and thinking about it a lot. And probably the best way to get up to date on what Microsoft is thinking on that front would be to check out the blog posts that Brad Smith, who's our chairman, vice chair, and president at Microsoft, and he outlines a lot of the responses. And one of the things that's interesting is Microsoft actually has a broad array of responses, right? We're thinking about our how to support our employees. We're certainly also thinking about how to support our employees engaging in providing humanitarian aid, but perhaps more relevant to this conversation and sort of is thinking a lot about the role that technology plays as well, and what we're doing to protect cybersecurity in the context of what's happening in Ukraine, and how to help protect people from state-sponsored disinformation. And so I think those are really interesting, important challenges for our time, both in the current context and
and like you, Jaime, I think at a big financial institution as well, the issue of cybersecurity, because a lot of those attacks happen through the financial system. So we're certainly very involved in all of that as well. And I think it's just extraordinary to see the corporate response, the individual response to this. It's sort of unlike any response to a war that we've ever seen before. So it's extraordinary times in that regard. So let's shift gears to you. So I read in doing a little bit of research, and we know each other reasonably well at this point, but I did a little bit of digging into your background, and somebody made a posting on a site that said the following, and I quote, "They are a different breed of species than ordinary mortals, different than gods. They are Microsoft technical fellows." So tell us about Technical Fellows at Microsoft, which is a designation you now have at Microsoft. What does this mean? What do you have to do to qualify? What's the process for this appointment? Because there aren't that many of them through Microsoft's history. So tell us more about being a Technical Fellow.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and you certainly. I actually was just made Technical Fellow last fall, and so Jennifer and I have talked through this too. Some of the thought process that's gone into it. The Technical Fellow title is a title of distinction that was introduced by Bill Gates at the turn of the millennium back in 2000. And it was introduced to recognize sustained individual technical achievements, sustained contributions, and that can be to the company, should be to the company, but it also needs to be to the broader community, be it the industry or through academic contributions. There are not many technical fellows, and there are even fewer female technical fellows. It's one of those titles that is very challenging for women. You know, I think maintaining your, and I'm sure we'll get into conversations around this, you know, and there's true, sincere effort. You know, there's a lot of thinking and sincere work that goes into thinking about the title of distinction at Microsoft, and certainly the broad range of technical achievement in people who are achieving things. But it's interesting, you know, I think as women, it's interesting to think about the challenges that it recognizes technical contribution. And often as a woman, I know it's hard to sort of remain fully technical. There's a lot of, I find often that I feel the need and to credential up, or sort of, you know, that's part of the reason I went and got my PhD. Nobody can question whether I'm technical when I have a PhD in AI, although that it doesn't mean that doesn't, you know, that doesn't happen. And then, and actually, there's interesting research around that as well, where you can see that women get how quickly women can lose technical cred. The other thing that it recognizes is individual contributions, and women's women are group players and tend to be seen for the way that they contribute to the larger group. And there's actually research there as well, for example, that shows women who co-author academic papers tend to get less credit for that paper that they participate in than they do if they were to author it alone, whereas men get more credit for that paper. So those are all interesting challenges. I think we've got, you know, I'm very honored to have been made part of that, and I'm honored to join the effort as well to bring more women and make the title a more diverse one in the future. So.
Well, congratulations on reaching this this level, and I think your points around credentializing up, which is a great expression, actually, is very true in a number of fields. Any technical field, certainly, where there's the opportunity to get advanced degrees and other technical sort of certifications and so forth. You really have to have that sort of stamp of approval more times than our male counterparts, it seems, to. Which is unfortunate. But so let's go back in time a little bit, Jaime, if you wouldn't mind. I'm curious as to how you found your way into a scientific career, and were you, you know, as you went through your early educational years, were you very much the sort of science and math student? Was it something you always had a passion for? Do you come from a family of scientists? What kind of lit the flame for you around science and so forth?
Yeah, that's a good question. I love creative thinking, and I view science as a deeply creative endeavor. And so I think I have been a creative person since the beginning. And, you know, I think we often actually make the mistake of thinking of math and science as very rigid. And we're like, oh yes, there's a right answer and a right way to do things. But when math and science get really interesting is when you're discovering new things and thinking about things in new ways. So I've been interested in, you know, uncovering truth and figuring out how things work for a long time. I didn't get into computer science specifically until halfway through college. I entered college thinking I was going to do physics. And then there was a cute boy in my computer science class who I'm now married to, but he brought me in, and he actually helped me over a lot of the hurdles. One of the challenges too that women have getting into computer science is there's a lot of sort of tacit knowledge that comes from playing video games and being like, I didn't know how to use Unix. I didn't know how to, and all those things were assumed to be things that you knew just going in. And I certainly wouldn't have stuck with the early intro classes if I hadn't had a cute boy to help me with that.
Well, that worked out well in every respect, actually, Jaime. So you also spent, prior to joining Microsoft, you did spend, quite a few years in sort of academia, if you will. Did you think you were going to have a full career in academia, or again, was that part of the credentializing process that people like you actually have to go through?
It's a good question. And I very specifically actually in part went to go get my graduate degree to credential up. When I was graduating from college, I was up in Connecticut, my husband was down in New York, and I was applying actually for a lot of jobs in addition to applying for some, for some PhD programs, partly because I wanted to be close to him. And I remember applying, for example, to a hedge fund. It was a very early sort of hedge fund that was doing algorithmic trading, and it was super cool. And just getting an interview there was really exciting. And so my friends were all jealous and super impressed that I made it through the interview process. And they came back to me and said, "Oh, Jaime, we'd like to make you an offer." And they offered me a role in HR. And they said, "Oh, yes, we would like you to come join our company so that you can help us hire all the tech geniuses that we want to go do this training." And that actually highlighted the sort of credentialing up conversation that we were having. Yeah. And, I kind of enjoyed being like, "No, thank you. I am going on an NSF fellowship to MIT to get my PhD." And that was a blast. It was really just fun to be able to start exploring, and the kinds of ways, internet was new, and I did research on personalized search and understanding how people find information and sort of the vast stores of information that become available. And it was a really interesting and exciting time to be doing research around how search engines work. Once you've spent then all of your time through undergraduate plus another 7 years to get your PhD, it's hard to imagine leaving the academic world. And so I stayed in academic. I applied mostly to faculty positions and Microsoft research, and I ended up going to, I have a joint appointment at the University of Washington, and also Microsoft Research has one of the world's best industrial research labs. And so I went there, but it was very much sort of like being a graduate student for another 10 years, getting to explore fun problems. At that time too, Microsoft was spinning up Bing and had, the really fun to be involved with sort of a search engine as it gets going. Developing the personalized search algorithms that work under that, and how do you pull up profiles for people quickly so that you can personalize the content they're finding among the billions of web pages that are there. And so that's a lot of what I did until just recently, actually. And then, as you mentioned, about 5 years ago, Satya asked me to come be his technical advisor. And that was really my transition away from a sort of more academic focus of what I was doing to understanding the role that the research we were doing really played in the world. And how do you take this technology and these advances that are happening and translate them into impact? And that's been really exciting as well.
So, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about mentors and people that have helped you along the way, including Satya now as your boss, who's just a great leader of a company, and certainly a great leader of Microsoft. So as you've sort of traveled your career path? Are there particular people you've looked up to, modeled yourself around, just had help at critical times from? And your career path is sort of so unusual relative to the rest of us, and not, I suspect, not a well-worn path by others, actually. So maybe there weren't a lot of, trailblazers you could go to ahead of time. So I'm curious as to just what network of support and people you had available to you as you managed all of this.
Yeah. Well, the academic community is nice in that you basically get given a lifetime mentor when you join through the form of your thesis advisor. And so I have my thesis advisor, David Karger, who's a theoretician at MIT, and my thesis committee, who were very important to me in sort of my academic period. Susan Dumais, who is one of the real founders of the information retrieval field, was on my thesis committee, and she's a researcher at Microsoft Research. And so I actually went and joined Microsoft partly to work with her and Eric Horvitz. And so, and she's been an amazing mentor, and is actually also a technical fellow at Microsoft. Jennifer Chase being another one. So, the sort of senior technical women have been really important to me. There's a bunch of and Microsoft has really great leadership, honestly. So Satya's amazing. Kevin Scott, who's our chief technology officer, has been an amazing mentor. And I guess there's sort of, when you have these conversations, there's often the distinction that's made between sponsorship and mentorship. And I would say, in particular, I've been lucky to have Kevin and Satya and Eric, for example, as real sponsors. I know that they're kind of looking out for me in good opportunities. That's how I ended up in my current role. To chart your own career path and to do unusual things, you need to have the space and be trusted to make up new things. And they were the ones who really trusted me to make that up. It's interesting. As you know, charting the path is charting an unusual path is hard, and particularly when the way to be successful in it looks different. The more senior I've gotten, the fewer women there are that I can look to for advice. And one of the things I've been doing is looking a little bit more broadly. I've been looking more broadly across discipline, which I think is really good for me. I spent a long time sort of building my technical cred, and am really interested in understanding how businesses run, how organizations run. So I talk a lot now with Kathleen Hogan, who runs as chief HR officer for Microsoft, or Kim Akers, who's a leader in the field. And I've also been looking more outside Microsoft, which is part of how we met, Jennifer.
And we found each other. Yes.
It's such a treat to get to know all the great women that are out there.
Yes, and we and just for the benefit of everybody on the webinar, so Jamie and I sort of bumped into each other, so to speak. So I wrote an op-ed last year about what I saw as the value of remote video conferencing, which Microsoft Teams being at the top of the list, Zoom, which we're using right now, others, and how I felt it provided certain key advantages for women and, quite frankly, other minorities as well. This notion, so you should all pull up my op-ed. is point number one. Number two, the sort of thing I talked about was, all about squares of the same size. You don't really know if I'm 6'2" or 4'2", and so much about power and assertiveness in the workplace is very physical in nature, and none of that really translates in the digital world the same way. So I wrote this op-ed about how empowering it was, and that women should really take advantage of the moment. Anyway, I wrote that op-ed. I had a meeting with Satya, and we were talking about the op-ed, and he said, you should really meet Jaime Teevan, because she's doing a lot of research around similar topics. So we met for lunch at a cute little restaurant in Redmond, And we've been in touch ever since. And I think it's great that Satya made that connection for us. And I think generally there are not enough women at the senior levels in most professions, certainly technology. And I'm a technology banker, and you practice your craft, so to speak. That it's really important that when we make those connections, we leverage them for our mutual benefit. And we need to pay that forward to others as well. But I give Satya the credit for introducing us, which was very good of him. So Jamie, I just want to dig in a little bit more around the women in STEM, women in science, women in computer science. And there's a lot of statistics. I'm just going to give a couple here. Women are 28% of the workforce at all levels at the top 50 US tech companies. We're 50% of the US workforce overall. And a lot is being written about this, lack of women in technology generally, whether it's as a technologist or as a business person, whether it's lack of funding for women starting companies in technology. What is the problem in your mind? And does it really go back to education, and we're not producing enough females who are interested in STEM and getting the credentials as we talked about? Or is there something else going on? Is it cultural inside these tech companies? What do you think is happening, and why not more progress?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And I recommend checking out the NCWIT, which stands for National Center for Women and Information Technology, something like that. Because they collect a lot of data around women in computer science. And it is really interesting to look at the trends compared with other areas for female representation. So when you look at physical sciences or law school or med school, you see a real trend in representation from those areas being largely all male dominated to being to significant female representation. So like in the 1970s, if you go to the NSF or the American Bar Association or the American Association of Medical Colleges, you'll see in the 1970s that roughly all of those had about 10% female representation in their schools. And you track up to today, and it's roughly 50% now for those different areas. And computer science is a real counterexample. So computer science kind of matched from the 1970s to the mid 80s, matched that trend. And then you see a peak in about 1985 at 37% female representation and now that is 21%. So 21% of the women graduating with their bachelor's 21% of the for computer science, and 21% for PhDs. And that's despite the fact that 57% of all people getting their bachelor's degrees are women. So it's a real, computing for some reason hasn't had the thing. And one of the things that's happened along that time is actually the number of people in computer science has grown really significantly. So yeah. It's not that we're not seeing absolute numbers of women going down, but we're seeing percentages go. The people who are moving into the field are tending to be male. And there's a lot of thinking around why that is. And if I knew the answer, I would fix it.
You'd have fixed it, yes. And I've often wondered about whether there's a sense of it, and this is probably the wrong characterization, but as somebody who's not a technologist or a computer scientist, of it perhaps being a solitary pursuit. Back to your comment about team dynamics and women often contributing, although I say that and I'm not even sure that's statistically true or whether there's evidence of that, but this perception that women function very well as part of teams, they enjoy functioning as part of teams, and that computer science can be a solitary pursuit.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a good observation. And I think you actually see one of the ways that can be helpful for women is connection to purpose with the work that they're doing. So I sponsor responsible AI in our core products, And that's something where we have a ton of gender diversity and diversity in general, because folks are interested in thinking about how we build and use AI in a way that doesn't encode bias and is fair and makes the world a better place. There's a bunch of reasons that, like, I've seen studies where even just the environment a person exists in, if you've got a bunch of sort of traditional geek culture kinds of stuff hanging on the walls in the computer science department, you're going to get fewer women enrolling in the computer science major than if you have other things. There's a lot of just figuring, seeing your own identity in the field matters a lot. And so I think having representation, pictures of, ways of understanding women is useful.
And seeing it as a creative endeavor,
seeing it as a creative endeavor that's important for the world. And I think that's really, we're seeing that technology too. That's something that Satya says. Every company is a technology company. It almost is, more than half of all software engineers who get hired into non-tech companies, because it's something that's now part of the fabric of how we get things done. And you see lots happening at the intersection of computer science and ethics, at the intersection of computer science and medicine, which has been huge in the whole COVID.
Financial services as well.
And financial services, exactly.
Yeah. So let's switch to the work you've been doing around the future of work. And obviously, through the pandemic, we've all learned to adjust in a myriad of different ways. I suspect by and large, has certainly been my experience, surprised myself at how adept I was at actually embracing and being proficient in using technology that probably just would have taken me a lot longer to get command of, and surprised at how efficient and how much work you can do. I think the world was surprised at how quickly we pivoted to a sort of remote environment. And of course, for most of us now, certainly for me, there's a big push to get people back into the office. And hopefully from there, we go to a hybrid model. But there's a view that we want to get people back first and then go to a hybrid model. But I'm curious, Jaime, and you've done a lot of research around it. And I think at the conclusion of this webinar, perhaps we can distribute to the people on this call some of the research you've done, because it's fascinating. But tell us a little bit about what you've been looking at, what you've learned about our behaviours and so forth. And then I want to talk a little bit about where all this goes and just how much better perhaps the technology will get, or how much better we'll get at using the technology. Oh, probably both, actually. But just tell us about your research and some of the conclusions or observations you can make about that.
Yep, and I definitely recommend folks check out the research. You can visit aka.ms/NFW to find all of the different papers that have been published and reports and podcasts and stuff. I believe it represents the largest cohesive effort to understand post-COVID work practices that there is in the world, which isn't surprising when you think about how important work is to Microsoft. So basically these past 2 years, all of the different ways that Microsoft studies work have kind of come together and focused on understanding remote and now hybrid work. So we've done a lot of research there. And exactly as you were saying, Jennifer, one of the biggest early surprises that we had was how productive people were when they remained remote. And when they moved remote. I mean, and we moved remote like overnight.
I know, it was fast.
Overnight. I mean, if you just remember, I remember like we were making the decision to send to what guidance to give people as they headed home. And we were like, should we tell them to take their plants home? No. I've got like dead plants in my office. So optimistic. Really, really overnight. And you can look at information worker productivity in a bunch of different ways. You can, one way that I really like to look, that we look at a lot, is developer productivity, because there's some concrete ways to measure developer productivity that you can track over time. And one common thing is to use pull requests, which is sort of this when a developer's completed a feature. And when you look at the number of pull requests before and after March 2020, you see that they remain constant or even go up a little bit as people move remote. And then you can start digging into like why are they remaining constant there? And it was a little bit of both reasons that it might. One is there was some efficiencies where developers were actually completing more pull requests in the same amount of time. And then the other was people were working longer hours. And that was either because we were not commuting or because we were working from home. So it became really easy to work in the evenings or on the weekends, or just because it was a really stressful time and we were all afraid of what was happening and relying on work for that. When I kind of think back, it's hard to remember, like you talk about how I'm like, ooh, I love remote work. This is great. Like when you remember March 2020, I just remember every night after my glass of wine, because I needed one, was like going to bed and just being so exhausted. It was just so hard to figure out that new thing to do. And I didn't even know how to end meetings. I'm like, how do I end a meeting when there's not somebody banging on my door saying, okay, now it's my turn.
Yeah.
But we figured that out. And like now it's easy. I can be like, oh yeah, we're at the hour. Let's head off. And we've sort of got that same challenge right now when we're heading back into the office. And I feel that when I go into the office with how exhausted I feel. And I'm like, I don't know how to do an in-person meeting. And I don't know, I missed, where's the in-meeting chat? I like that. Where'd that go? How do I take my notes while looking at somebody? That doesn't, and you see that, and we call that the hybrid paradox, where people want the flexibility of remote work to stay, but they want more in-person time. And, it's exciting to go back. And so I think that's a real challenge ahead of us as we start to enter this hybrid work era, is to figure out how to get the best of both worlds. Right now, we're a little bit in the struggling and sometimes getting the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, we're feeling our way a bit. And part of the issue is each individual probably can't just make their own decision because there's corporate infrastructure and people are in charge. And so there's a certain amount and you need teams together on certain days. But I certainly, and I'm in a sales job, basically, I hope that we end up in a place where I can decide largely, but not entirely for myself, that this interaction should be face-to-face in a conference room, or it could be dinner, or it could be lunch, or it could be a phone call or an email or a whatever, and you choose what's appropriate to the purpose and the person on the other end. If we could get to that, to have that level of autonomy, I would love that.
And I particularly like your push on or an email, because one of the things that we're seeing too is this real, how can we turn more work asynchronous from synchronous and turn it into an email or a status update, and you actually see a ton of move from synchronous to asynchronous interaction post-pandemic, which I think is really interesting. My children, for example, call their homework now asynchronous schoolwork.
Well, that's your children. I don't know that mine would have done that.
No, but I think, and you can think about that. Like, think of all the meetings that you can now watch double speed post hoc instead of having to attend live. So I think there is this rich toolbox that we have available to us now.
And we will get better at it. I've said to my boss, if you're exhausted after doing 12 video conferences in a day, well, that's your fault, not the technology's fault, actually. And there are features that you can use during the course of a video conference, like chat and so forth, that can make for, just very efficient interaction. So there's not enough training around all of this, whether it's active listening, like you can't do your emails while you're talking to somebody you've got to be present, even though it is a video conference. I think there's a lot of training for people. Jaime, I wanted to ask, just in your research, any particular observations that are along gender lines? And I know you'd mentioned to me at one point that the people really wanting to get back into the office were the men first versus women, or even the more diverse population. What can you tell us about gender research here?
Yeah, and we definitely are seeing that. So for example, in a large external survey that we ran, we found in the US that Black and Latino workers are more likely to want to stay remote than white workers. Women prefer to stay remote more than men do. I've seen data that suggests women are happier, and people of color as well, are happier working from home than in the office. So for example, 52% of women enjoy working remotely and would like to stay doing that in the long term, whereas only 41% of men would. And then you start seeing that in the job data as well. So when we look at LinkedIn, you'll see that women, for example, are 26% more likely to apply for a remote job than men. Younger people are also more likely to apply for remote. And there's a bunch of different reasons that this is happening. You know, the pandemic, when we look at well-being data and some of the challenges around the pandemic, certainly a lot of the sort of invisible work or the unpaid labor that happens at homes, particularly as children are staying home, has fallen on women. And so you see women and parents often having sort of similar kinds of results. I've also heard from people and seen research suggesting, you know, there's a bunch of microaggressions and challenges about being in the office. And sometimes it's nice to not get exposed to those all the time. Like being at the office is a little bit heavier for some people than others. I saw this one study that was looking at the different kinds of anxieties that people had over returning for the office. And, you know, not surprisingly, for example, women are much more worried about what they're gonna wear, or how they're gonna present themselves going back into the office compared to men. A lot of those challenges, you know, I think that presentation of self, we have much more control over our presentation of self when we're in our little box than when we're in the physical.
Yeah, and I don't think there's enough sort of discussion about that. There's just kind of, we're all going to, there's a push to get people back to work, not everywhere, but in a lot of places. And hopefully at some point there'll be a more sort of intelligent conversation about these nuances. And in the meantime, I would really encourage certainly everybody, every female on this call, and this is what I sort of shout to the rafters, that, you know, don't ghost people on video conference by turning off your cameras, turn them on. It doesn't really matter if you've got a speaking role in the meeting. You'll brand yourself and just be known and make connections, even if you don't realize they're happening, by being seen, and to take advantage of the fact that, you know, there's not a hierarchy on these video. I don't know that anybody yet can actually, you know, it's not programmed, any of them, Teams or any of the others, to sort of make me the center of the screen. I don't, maybe there is now. I know I had people asking me that question. You know, it typically is based on how early you joined the call, determines your place on the screen, or how often you speak and so forth. So there's all these things that create certain advantages to people who might otherwise be marginalised around a conference room table. So Jaime, any thoughts? You know, you could look well into the future as to how some of this technology is going to change. Like, is it AR, VR sort of going to be? Are we all going to be, or in the metaverse, are we all going to be avatars? And, you know, just how is all of this communication and how we interact in the workplace likely to change? Any big predictions that you want to make?
Yeah, I mean, so I mentioned the asynchronous engagement, and I think we're going to see a lot happen there. You know, video is the fastest growing media type at Microsoft. The ability to watch and attend things asynchronously is great. And like being remote, the fact that we're remote is great. We can have more distributed teams, but we can't get rid of time zones. And, you know, we can't change the fact that this is the middle of the day for me and it's the end of the day for you. And if we wanted to have a call with folks in China and India, there'd be just no time where we could all get on the call at the same time. So I think some of that thinking about how do we have these rich kinds of interactions across time is really important. I think as we start to move into the workplace, there's going to become really interesting advances in how to include remote people. So exactly as you were saying, Jennifer, there's an importance that we don't lose, or that the remote people don't end up as invisible. You're seeing women, for example, apply to 5 times more remote jobs at a much higher rate. How do we make sure that they still show up? There are, there's some good things that we're going to want to bring from remote into the in-person as well. In-meeting chat is a great way for women to show up too. So you mentioned turning your camera on is one way to show up. Actually participating in chat. It's often a way to participate without having to take the floor, which can be uncomfortable. I use it all the time. I really like it. How can we keep using that in in-person meetings and make that useful? I think there's going to be a bunch of interesting scheduling technologies coming about as well. So how do we optimize our time and figure out that this is the right day for us to be in, and think about what scheduling looks like differently, so that we can hang out and spend time together and create some of that that social capital that we lose when we're remote. I think we'll continue to see remote synchronous collaboration getting richer. I think we're going to see, one of the things that's super interesting is how cheap physical space is relative to talent. So that on average, companies spend about 1/10 on physical space compared to what they spend on people. And so that means if getting rid of space reduces your workforce productivity by 10%, you've made by more than 10%, you've made a bad financial decision, basically. And so we can start getting we need to start getting really intentional about how we use that physical space. It's not about like, oh, great, now we can have everybody be remote and sort of squeeze away space. It's this opportunity for us to get really intentional about how we use space and how we introduce that. And that's going to have interesting challenges about how to, what does that space look like? How does that space get set up? How does it interact with our digital technologies? And how are we allocating it in a thoughtful manner?
Yeah, it's, I think clearly at Microsoft, because you're leading the charge, there's a lot of research being done around behaviors and what I think there's a lot of the rest of the corporate world certainly that needs to be collecting the right data and analysing a lot of these issues, because a lot of people are just making presumptions about what works and what doesn't work, and cause and effect that is not based on actual data collection. It's just based on how, my opinion or how I've done things before, so it has to be true. Right now, sometimes I think if anything goes wrong, people blame it on people not being in the office, and that just can't possibly be true for any problem that comes along. So Jaime, in closing, and this has been a really fast 45 minutes, and I didn't get through anywhere near all the questions, but I did want to circle back to sort of the personal, if you don't mind. How do you've got 4 kids, big job, a pandemic has been going on around us. Microsoft's sort of at the forefront of all of these new technologies that we're using. What do you do to relax? How do you think about that sort of, the switch off moment where you put the technology away, and how important is that to you personally? And do you think just generally it needs to be for people to manage what seems to be a more stressful life all the time for all of us?
Yeah, so it's actually it's both a personal question you're asking, but a professional question, because I do research in that space as well. So interestingly, switching off is really important to your productivity, being able to take time off. We've actually run studies that really interesting. One of the things that I've done research from pre-pandemic, but that is only more relevant now that our work and home spaces have sort of collapsed into a single space, is transitions. And it's really important to not stay in work mode, for example, when you're taking time off. It was one of the big things I found really hard early in the pandemic as well, that I'd leave my office and head out into the house, and I have 4 boys, teenage boys, and so I'd walk out and they'd be like, "What's for dinner?" and just start talking to him and my head was still running and it was really stressful. And so I would yell at them for no good reason. And it sucked. And I think getting really thoughtful and intentional about those transitions, whether it's how you transition between meetings. I have a 5-minute period, but that's kind of become standard between meetings, is take that time. And we have we have EEG brain scans that show if you don't take those 5-minute breaks between meetings, you're actually you accumulate stress over the course of the day. Yeah. So you should be taking 5 minutes to do something else between meetings. So transitioning between meetings, transitioning between the start and the end of a work time, and it may be like one of the nice things about working remotely is your work times don't have to be, it's not an 8-hour chunk necessarily anymore. You can be more thoughtful about it, but be intentional about when you're starting work and when you're moving out of work, and likewise into vacations and other things. I go to bed at 8 p.m. It's like I really truly believe if I don't get 8 or 9 hours of sleep, I don't function well. I am a better, more productive person to go lay in bed, reread Harry Potter for the 17th time, and then go to sleep and wake up in the morning. So anyway, I think those transitions, and you were mentioning being present earlier, really being intentional about being present.
Yeah, I agree. And I have to admit, in my own career, one of the things that I found a very effective transition mechanism was actually having children. Because when you walked in that door of an evening or whatever, it was that instant pivot to a different, nobody cared what deal I'd done that day or how important I was or what meeting I'd had. It was just that instant shift. And while it used to be quite jarring at times, I learned to be very grateful for it, because it just took you out of that work mode for whatever period of time into the, somebody needs a bath or a story or a homework help or whatever, and you just had to shift gears. I actually look back on that and think of that as more of a blessing to my own psyche than a chore. Felt like a chore a little bit at the time, but I think it really forced me out of that, investment.
Also, it forced me into the 8 p.m. bedtime. Like, my kids
sure.
were to bed at midnight, but it was putting the kids to bed at 8 that taught me that habit.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I absolutely understand, having 4 of my own, but not 4 boys. So you kind of win the prize on that one, Jamie. So look, we've come to the end of our session. I can't thank you enough. There's so much more we could talk about, whether it's the technology or balancing everything that we balance, the future of work, world affairs, credentializing up, which is just, I'm gonna use that. But thank you so much, Jamie, for sharing time with us. And I'm sure everybody on this webcast has just learned a great deal. And I hope that we can have you back in the future for round 2.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Yeah. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.